All right. I just want to give a nice introduction. This is the penultimate session of the Torah in Jewish, Christian, and Islamic interpretation. This ongoing series, we have had the pleasure of learning with Dr. Gafni on the topic of the Bible as we know it has been canonized, and then its interpretation became the subject of fierce debates between Jews and the nation Christian church. Centuries later, with the arrival on the scene of Islam, the battles still rage, and now all three major monotheistic religions took part in the polemics. We have this course. This is as said earlier. This is the penultimate session of this class, part of Grisha's ongoing Sphira Zman. And with that, I am happy to hand things over to Dr. Gafni for today. Good evening.
Thank you so much. So we have two more sessions. Today is not the last session. There's another session coming up. And what we're going to do today, we're going to continue pretty much from where we stopped in discussing the Islamic way of reading the Bible. I'll just share my screen with you. Okay, you see it?
Yes.
Okay, so again, the way we always do, I want to start with a brief review over what we've done, and then we'll continue. So what we've done so far, in the opening session, we discussed the differences between traditional and critical ways of reading the Bible. We emphasized that traditional people don't try to contextualize or leave the text in the past, but try to think how to make this text meaningful, inspiring, practical in the present as well. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that every traditional person or camp or religious camp would read the Bible the same way, because different religious camps or traditions are going to be struggling with different elements in the Bible, and they're going to try to overcome those problems or challenges in different ways when they try to bring the Bible from the past to the present. We started dealing first with a Jewish way of reading the Bible. We emphasized that for Jews, the main concern probably was to think how we apply, how we practice the laws of the Bible in changing circumstances. Reality changes, the world changes, and we need to think how we carry out, how we fulfill those same laws in changing the circumstances. And that's the Jewish challenge. In order to overcome that challenge, Jews came up with what we call the drash, this thorough analysis of the text, sometimes more logical, sometimes more mystical in its nature. But the idea was to think how we can practice the laws, even in changing circumstances. In addition to that, when Jews read the stories, they do want to make the stories meaningful and inspiring, and that's the way they're using the drash when we think about it in realms of agadah, non-legal elements of the text. We proceeded afterwards and we discussed the Christian way of reading the Bible, and here we emphasized that the challenge was slightly different. For Christians, we're facing, in a sense, two challenges at the same time. On the one hand, when trying to preach to larger crowds of pagans, they wanted to get rid of the practical element of the laws in the Bible. That's one on the one hand, but also they wanted to find references or allusions to Jesus in the Torah or in the other parts of the Bible. In order to overcome that problem, Christians come up with a different strategy, and that is reading the Bible as an allegory, as a metaphor. By doing that, Christians tried to explain the laws as something that doesn't need to be practiced or carried out in the literal sense, but rather presenting some symbolic values or ideas. Also, when they read stories, historical events, Christians often would say, look, this event might have happened, but it also is supposed to be used as some sort of prophecy for what will happen later on in Jesus' life or present other elements in Christianity. So again, it's a traditional way of reading the Bible in a way that makes sense and becomes meaningful for the present, but obviously in a very different way than the way that Jews read the text. This Christian interpretation, we said, was found both in the New Testament, but also in church fathers' literature. We discussed then Jewish and Christian debates. Should the Bible be read literally or allegorically? And then we proceeded and started discussing Islamic ways of reading the Torah or Islamic ways of reading the Bible more in general. What we did in the previous session was mainly focus on the way that the Quran retells biblical stories or episodes. And what we will do today, we will move on and talk about medieval Islamic interpretations of the Bible, how the medievalists try to read the Bible within Islam. Before we get into all those texts, I just want to emphasize one thing to make things a little bit more clear, or to remind us of what we saw about the Quranic way of reading the Bible, in contrast to what we will see today. So in the previous session, we discussed the way in which the Bible is interpreted in the Quran. We saw that the Quran, in numerous places, it's not a rare thing, it comes up very, very frequently. We see that the Quran retells or repeats episodes or stories from the Bible in its own way. When we discussed the Quran itself, we saw we were trying to explore the different types of ways that stories are being presented. And as I said, in the following session, we'll explore later Islamic post-Quranic literature that includes references to the Bible, and particularly to the Torah. When we spoke about the Quran, we saw that the Quran doesn't really find places in which the Torah is speaking about Muhammad, or it's speaking about Islam. Quran itself, what the Quran does is often reads the stories of the Bible in a way that would resemble later events in Muhammad's life, to make the text more similar or more inspiring for Muslim readers. It would read sometimes stories in the Bible in a way that would pave the way for Islamic ideas. But in the Quran itself, we never find anything in which, or places in which the Quran tells us where Muhammad is found in the Bible, or any ideas of Islam that are actually found in the Tanakh, in the Hebrew Bible. That does not exist in the Quran, in contrast to what we see in Christianity, where the New Testament or church fathers actually pointed out to those verses or those stories in the Bible where they claimed Jesus was found or was alluded to. This gap might have troubled later medieval Muslim scholars, because they really wanted to find explicit references to Muhammad, or in particular, or to Islam in general, in the Hebrew Bible, in the Tanakh. They wanted to find, where is Muhammad found in the Hebrew Bible? Where is Islam mentioned in the Hebrew Bible? Not just reading stories of the Bible and think how much they're similar to what will happen later on in Islam. They wanted to find those actual references to Muhammad or to Islam in the Bible. And what we will do today is to try to see some of those examples. But before we do that, I want to explain what might have inspired or might have led these medievalists to look for such hints. Although the Quran doesn't ever point out to places in which the Tanakh, in which the Torah is referring to Muhammad, but the Quran does say in a few places that somewhere out there in the Bible, you would find places in which Muhammad or Islam is mentioned. What am I referring to? So for example, in the second surah, which is the longest surah in the Quran, we have this description speaking about Abraham and Ishmael building the foundations, or raising the foundations of some house. Some people say this is another place where the story of the binding is alluded, but that's a separate question. And in the course of this description, we find the following words. Kayla, you want to read a little bit?
Well,
and remember the
if no one else wants to, I'm happy to step up. Where would you like me to start from?
So we can start from the, we'll do the whole thing now. And remember
the time when Abraham and Ishmael raised the foundation of the house, praying, O Lord, accept this from all us, for thou art all-hearing, all-knowing. Our Lord, make us submissive to thee, and make of our offspring a people submissive to thee. And show us our ways of worship, and turn to us with mercy, for thou art oft returning with compassion and merciful.
Now we're getting to the important verse. So this is just a prayer of Abraham and Ishmael asking people to become submissive to God, which is the word submissive is the translation of lead aslim, to become Muslim. But in 130, that's the crucial verse, and our Lord,
raise up from them a messenger from among themselves, who may recite to them thy signs, and teach them the book and wisdom, and may purify them. Surely thou art the mighty, the wise.
Okay, so in this verse, Abraham and Ishmael, already in the Torah, are referring to some future messengers that will emerge from among themselves, who may recite to them the signs and teach them the book. Some Muslims believed that this story referring to Abraham and Ishmael is indicating that already Abraham and Ishmael were familiar or were aware of the fact that a later messenger should arise. And from their perspective, this is speaking about Muhammad. And if that's the case, Muhammad should have been mentioned somewhere, or was at least known to those biblical figures already back then. Even more clear or explicit is what we find in the following two other surahs, surah number 7 and surah number 61. So in surah number 7, Muhammad again is praising those people who are following his words. And what does he add, Kayla?
Those who follow the messenger, the prophet, the Immaculate One, whom they find mentioned in the Torah and the Gospels which are with them. He enjoins on them good and forbids.
Okay, so here's what's important. Muhammad is referring to or praising those people who follow the messenger, the prophet, that they find mentioned in the Torah and in the Gospel. Gospel is the Injil. So we have here a place where Muhammad seems to be saying that the messenger, referring to himself, must have been mentioned in the Torah or in the Gospel. Finally, and this is even the most explicit example, in Surah number 61, it's referring to, it's quoting a sentence said by Jesus, and this is what it says. Again, we're reading passages from the Quran, but it's referring to Jesus, and what does it say there? 61.
And remember when Jesus, son of Mary, said, O children of Israel, surely I am Allah's messenger unto you, fulfilling that which is before me of the Torah, and giving glad tidings of a messenger who will come after me. His name will be Ahmad. And when he came to them with clear proofs, they said, this is clear enchantment.
Okay, so here we have even one step further. It's not just referring in a vague manner, what we saw before, to a messenger. And it's not just referring to a messenger or a prophet that they find in the Torah or in the Gospel. It's even mentioning his name. From this passage, it seems that the Quran is arguing that the messenger, meaning Muhammad, was already known at the time of the Torah or at the time of Jesus, and they even specify his name. They say his name shall be Ahmad. So if that was true, Ahmad is supposed to be found somewhere in the Bible. The Islamic prophet is supposed to be somewhere in the Torah, because this is what Muhammad himself says. My name, Ahmad, was already found both in the Torah or in the words of Jesus. Perhaps for that reason, medieval Islamic scholars were very, very eager to find. So where is Muhammad found in the Bible? Not just to find resemblance in the stories of the forefathers and the later events that will happen to Muhammad, like the story of Noah trying to preach his words to everybody and having everybody mock him. That's just a resemblance. But they wanted to find, where is Muhammad found in the Bible? Where is Muhammad himself found in the Bible? Where does the word Ahmad, where can the word Ahmad, the name of the prophet, where is that found in the Hebrew Bible? Our interest here is mainly the Torah, where was Muhammad found in the Torah or in the other parts of the Bible. But I'm just pointing out that a similar task was also taking place with regards to the New Testament, because in Surah number 61, as you just read, Kyla, we saw that Jesus also says that he knows, he's familiar with the fact that a later messenger will come named Ahmad. So scholars indeed also found references to Muhammad in the New Testament. Here I'm bringing you a verse from John, where this particular verse is the verse where some Muslims argue Muhammad was already found in the New Testament. However, our main concern in this class is to see, where is Muhammad found in the Hebrew Bible, in the Torah? Where can we find references to Islam in the Torah? Now, before we proceed, we have to remember, most Muslims in the medieval period were not familiar with the Hebrew Bible. They never read the Hebrew Bible, for sure not in Hebrew, but not even in Arabic translations. Even if such translations existed, it was certainly not encouraged by Islam to read Tanakh, to read Torah in the Jewish form of that book. Obviously, they read the Quran with all those overlapping stories, but reading the Torah in its original form was not something that Muslims would do. And therefore, it was not so simple to find or trace all those places where Muhammad might be found in the Torah or in the Tanakh. So who are the people who were able to find, trace, locate all those references to Islam in the Bible? It was usually Jews who converted to Islam. And after converting to Islam, using their familiarity and access to the Bible in its original Hebrew, they were able to provide other fellow Muslims proofs or indications where they can actually trace or find Muhammad's name in the Tanakh. We're going to read the story of one of those famous Jews who converted to Islam. His name was Samuel al-Maghrabi, but he was probably not born as Samuel. He was probably born as Shmuel. And at some point in his life, he wrote a composition where he's also describing what led him to convert from Judaism to Islam. And in addition, he's collecting all sorts of proofs based on his Jewish education that led him to make this decision that indeed one should convert and change his beliefs to Islam. The book was called, this is a translation from Arabic. In English, it's called Keeping the Jews Quiet, with a misspelling mistake there. But that's the cover of the book, Ifaham el Yahud. And before we actually read some of his quotes or places that he locates in the Bible where Muhammad is found, I just want to read a little bit from his autobiography that comes before he provides those proofs. And he's giving us a very different, he appears as a very interesting character. On the one hand, he's a very rational thinker, and he's trying to come up with the rational arguments why one needs to convert to Islam. But then there's also this mystical part of his personality that also is part of that. So we're reading here from the autobiography part of his book. Kyla, you want to read for us again? I'm sorry to trouble you.
If no one else has any strong opinions on reading, I'm perfectly happy to. All right. As to disbelieving all, reason does not dictate that either. For we find that they all preached lofty morals, appeared for the virtues and against the vices, and regulated the world in a fashion beneficial to mankind. Thus, trenchant proof convinced me of the prophethood of Jesus and of Muhammad, and I believed in them. For some time,
he starts by saying, I'm stopping you for a second. He starts by saying, when he was thinking about this in a rational manner, he decided there's no reason to accept Moshe, but reject Jesus or Muhammad. It's either all or nothing. And from his perspective, there's nothing that makes you want to reject their prophecies. They're all speaking or preaching for moral values, and therefore, why not accept all of them? Nevertheless, for some time,
out of consideration for my father, I held this belief without performing the Muslim rites. For he loved me intensely and could hardly live without me and was very much attached to me. He was careful about my upbringing, occupying me since my early youth with disciplines based on logical demonstration and training my thought and mind in arithmetic and geometry, the two disciplines whose mind's developing quality was praised by Plato.
Okay, so he was also very considerate for his father, for his parents, and he decided not to hurt their feelings by converting to Islam. But this did not hold for too long, because at some point, he says later on in his book, for a long time, I was not granted divine guidance. In this uncertainty, meaning the consideration for my father did not abandon me until travels separated me from him, and my abode became distant from him. Yet I persisted in my respect for him and in an effort to avoid distressing him on my account. But, as I said, in the time of divine guidance arrived. At some point, he receives some divine revelation. The divine call reached me in a vision of the prophet in a dream in the night of the 9th of, this is the number of a month, the name of a month, in the year 558. This was in Maraya, in Abarjayadan. So this is what he's describing us. This is not the year 558 that we count. It's based on the Islamic way of counting the years, starting from the Hijra, the year in which Muhammad travels from Mecca to Medina. In any event, here you see the Samuel al-Maghrabi more in a mystical manner. He's also describing these visions that he's receiving. And after these visions, he decides after he receives this divine guidance, he decides to convert to Islam. But he doesn't forget all of his Jewish background, and he remembers the Bible very thoroughly, and he wants to impress fellow Muslims, not just that he accepts their Islamic ideas, but that he can even bring proofs from his original training, from the Hebrew Bible, where Muhammad is found. And this is what he's doing. So we're going to read different types of proofs. You need to keep in mind, there was not, a big number of proofs of that kind. It's not the same as what we see in Christianity, where essentially every important story or every important event becomes a prophecy can serve as a prophecy for later Christianity. In Islam, we're speaking about a number of verses that keep appearing again and again in all sorts of Islamic writings, and probably they were initially discovered by Jews, by Jewish converts to Islam, but then they kind of, other Muslims might recycle the same type of proofs. So we're not talking about big numbers of proofs, and I want us to experience or see different types of proofs. And we'll also think whether these types of proofs would convince us in modern times. So the first proof we're using is taken from Genesis 17, the Reshit Perek Yud Zayin. And this is something that is where Abraham is, after Ishmael was born, but Abraham is informed that he's going to have another son named Yitzchak. Abraham is a little bit upset. And what about my firstborn by Ishmael? And God tells him the following verse: Uli Ishmael shma'aticha. With regards to Ishmael, as for Ishmael, I have heard you. Hine berachti oto, vihifreti oto, virbeti oto bimod meod. Shenem asar nusiim yolid, untativ legol gadol. So we'll read the English. And as for Ishmael, I have heard you. I will surely bless him, and I will make him fruitful, and will greatly increase him in his numbers. And he will be the father of 12 rulers, and I will make him into a great nation. This is what Abraham is being informed by Ishmael. This verse, among a few other verses, will become a central verse where Muslims argue Muhammad is actually found in this verse. Any ideas where? Where is Muhammad here? Do you see the name of Muhammad anywhere here? No. So where is that found? Where would Muslims argue they can find Muhammad in this verse? So for that purpose, we're going to read this in the book of Samuel al-Maghrabi, and we'll try to see how did he find Muhammad in this verse in the Torah. And this is what he's saying here in his composition. The quote is not precisely the same quote as we have it in our Tanakh, but almost the same. In addition, I have to emphasize this is a text that is translated to English from the Arabic. It has all those Hebrew words in it, but the text itself is all in Arabic, which gives us a sense who was this targeting to. It was not really meant for Jews to use this. It's not really trying to convince Jews to convert to Islam. It's more impressing other Muslims that he found all those Islamic ideas in the Torah. And this is what he says here in his book, Ifacham El Yahud. Ayla.
Sure. God says in the third portion of the first book of the Torah, addressing Abraham, the friend of God, and as for
the
Ishmael,
third portion of the Torah is referring to the third parasha. This is referring to Parashat Lech Lecha. We have Bereshit, Noach, Lech Lecha. So this is the third parasha. He's still remembering Parashat HaShavua from his youth. So he's referring to the third parasha, Parashat Lech Lecha, addressing Abraham, the friend of God, Al-Khalil.
And as for Ishmael, I have heard thee, but behold, I have blessed them, and will make him fruitful, and will multiply him exceedingly. In the original, by Ishmael.
So I'll read the Hebrew.
Yeah,
You'll do the English, I do the Hebrew. Uli Ishmael shma'aticha, hine berachti oto, vifreti oto, virbeti oto bimod meod. And again, we're looking, so where is Muhammad to be found here? Now.
All right, now this word exceedingly, meod meod, if we compute the numerical value of its letters, will add up to 92, which is also the numerical value of the letters in his name Muhammad. Yet in this present passage, this was left enigmatic. Had it been clearer, the Jews might have changed it or admitted it from the Torah as they did elsewhere.
Okay, so what is he using? What type of proof is he using in order to demonstrate that Muhammad is actually found in the Torah? So he's using a very sophisticated skill, namely, he's referring to Gematria. And he says if we use this Gematria idea, we can actually find Muhammad's name in the text. The text says, Vine berachti oto, ifreti oto, virbeti oto, bimod meod. So the crucial words here are bimod meod, the words that I put in bold letters above. And what he's saying is that if you calculate this using Gematria, so it would come out perfect. Bimod, you see here, bet and mem and daled are 47. Me'od is the same thing, just without the bet, so that's 45. So 47 plus 45 makes 92, which is exactly mem chet mem dalet, which is the name of Muhammad, 92 as well. So here we have a clear proof for Muhammad in the Torah. Let me ask you, does this proof convince you? Would you convert to Islam based on this proof? So I think Samuel al-Maghrabi was aware that it's not as convincing, but he's actually addressing that in his own words. If you remember what you just read a minute ago, Kayla, you said, yet in the present passage, this was left enigmatic. Had it been clear, the Jews might have changed it or omitted it from the Torah as they did elsewhere. So here we're connecting to the series that we had in the previous, in the winter, dealing with the text of the Torah. So if you recall, Muslims also accuse Jews of having forged or distorted the text of the Torah for all sorts of reasons, among other reasons, because they wanted to get rid of all those references to Muhammad in the Torah. So what Samuel al-Maghrabi is saying, look, don't blame me. I know this is not the best proof in the world, but look, the better proofs that existed in the Torah probably were already removed from the Torah by Jews way before my time. So I'm not going to be able to bring you proofs what it says in the Torah, mem chet mem dalet. That's not going to be found anywhere. All I can bring you is all those non-convincing proofs that Jews might have missed, that they didn't notice, and therefore they still remained in the text. So don't blame me. The good proofs were there, but they were just removed by Jews a long time ago. So this is a way he's trying to address, in a sense, acknowledging the fact that these are not the most convincing arguments in the world. It's just an allusion to Muhammad, but not really his name explicitly. There's one place in the Sefer Yechezkel, in Ezekiel, where the letters Mem, Chet, Mem, Dalet actually appear. And in that, with regards to that text, they claim this is referring to Muhammad as well. But in the text here from Genesis, it's just alluded in the Bimod Meod, the numerical value, which makes 92. But he adds another sentence here, which is also trying to strengthen this argument. Let me ask you a question. Today, it's very easy to do that. But if I was trying to calculate the gematria of names in the Bible, I can assure you that your names, meaning Drisha audience, your names probably also appear somewhere in the if you use your gematria, right? If I take a Kayla and I turn it into a number, we will probably find some word in the entire Bible that matches that same number, or Chanan for that matter as well, right? I'm sure we can find some 108 somewhere in the Bible. Would that make me or you a prophet or a messenger? So obviously that does not work, and he was aware of that problem as well. For that reason, he adds the following sentence. They might say
that there are a number of words in the Torah with a numerical value equal to that of the names of Zaid, Amir, Khalid, and Bakir, but it does not follow that Zaid, Amir, Khalid, and Bakir are prophets.
Right, so we can find similar gematriot of other Arabic names. So he's using a bunch of Arabic names, Zaid, Bakir, Khalid, which are also important names in Islam. But he says that does not mean that all these people are already alluded in the Torah. The answer to that is, how will we respond to that argument?
It would be as they say, if this verse were the mere equal of other Torah passages, but we shall produce proofs and demonstrate that it is without equal in the rest of the Torah. Namely, no other verse of the Torah honors Ishmael as this one does, which is a divine promise to Abraham on how great will be the honor of Ishmael.
Okay, so what is he saying? He says, look, I didn't choose here a random verse from anywhere in the Torah. If the Torah wanted to mention Muhammad anywhere, this is probably the ideal place for the Torah to choose. This verse is speaking about a blessing given to Abraham regarding his son Ishmael, the forefather of all of Islam. So if the Torah says, with regards to Ishmael, Shma'aticha, and I will bless him, and I will make him fruitful, and I will multiply him, bim'od me'od, if we had to choose a place to mention or to allude or to hint to Muhammad, that would be the ideal place. So it's not that I chose a random verse from Proverbs or from Psalms and I found the number 92 and that made me think, wow, this is Muhammad. There's something more meaningful about this verse that makes this choice a better place to look for Muhammad, and that's why it's more convincing. If you see, I didn't quote this from Al-Maghrabi's book, but if you see, I also put in bold letters the final two words of the same verse, of the following verse, V'yishmei shma'aticha hine berachti oto, v'ifreti oto, v'irbeti oto b'm'od me'od, 12 nesi'im yolid, untativ legoy gadol. Why did I put the words legoy gadol in bold letters? You want to guess? I think it's easy. Now that you saw the bim'od me'od, I think it gives you, I'm giving you a sense.
Does it also have a significant gematria?
Oh, good. I see already following the Islamic way of approaching this verse, at least Samuel al-Maghrabi's way. So indeed, what he's arguing is that you will, if you will check this verse, you will see that legoy gadol also makes 92. Legoy is 49, Lamed is 30, Yud is 10, and Gimel and Vav is 9, so that makes 49. Gadol, so you have Lamed again 30, Daled and Vav are 10, so it's 40, and Gimel is 3, so 49 plus 43 is 92. So if you're not happy with the first Bim'od Me'od, now we have two proofs in one verse. And again, Muslim writers in medieval times tried to claim this is alluding to Muhammad. And I want to emphasize again, this is very different than what we did in the previous session. In the previous session, we read how Quran tells stories in the Bible, and we saw, look, there's similarities in the way the story is being told. We can view some of the stories as they're being told in the Bible, in the Quran, in an anachronistic manner. So they tell the stories of Noah or of Abraham in light of events that will happen to Muhammad, to make some similarities between the two, to show that Muhammad is facing challenges that people before his time also were facing. But in the Quran itself, beyond stating that Muhammad appears somewhere in the Bible, the Quran itself does not point to any place in the Torah or anywhere else in the Bible where Muhammad actually is found. And this is what these Islamic writers are doing. They're going a big step beyond what the Quran was doing before. They're actually pointing out the stories in the Bible where they claim Muhammad himself is to be found. It's not the way that it was done in Christianity. Christians also want to find Jesus in the Bible, but it's done in a very different manner. From Islamic perspective, this is not really using allegories or a symbolic way of reading the text. They're reading the text in a literal manner, but using all these techniques, gematria, for instance, they were able to find Muhammad in the Bible. The fact that Muslims are relying on gematria shows that that Samuel al-Maghrabi is using gematria shows that it's not only that he was familiar with the Jewish Bible, he was also familiar with the Jewish techniques of how to read the Bible. So gematria is often found in Midrash. So what Samuel al-Maghrabi is doing, he's employing the same technique, the same method, but for his own purposes, in order to find Muhammad in the text. And we're moving on to another example. And the second example we're going to see is a little bit of a different nature. It's not relying on this calculation or gematria, but rather on the meaning of the verse itself. In Deuteronomy 18, two different verses, the Torah it's part of Parashat Shoftim, and the Torah is telling Moshe is approaching the people of Israel, and he's also bringing them all sorts of ideas, what will happen after he dies, and also what will happen when they enter the land of Israel. So he's talking about the judges that will come, and he's talking about the kings that will appear, but he's also talking about future prophets. And Moshe says the following words, Navi mikirbecha me'achecha kamoni, yakim lecha Hashem Elohecha, elav tishma'un. Or later on, in a rather similar manner, Navi akim lahem mekerev achehem kamocha, ונתתי דברי בפיו ודיבר עליהם. In English, it will sound something like, I will raise the prophet from among their brethren, like unto thee. In him they shall believe. Elav tishma'un. Samuel al-Maghabi here too found references from his perspective to Muhammad. And this time it's not going to be based on a gematria, but rather on the meaning of the text. So where's Muhammad found in this version? It's talking about a future prophet, true, but how do we know this is referring to Muhammad? If he didn't peek yet, where's Muhammad here? Now don't look for numbers. It's nothing about math. It's about the meaning. Why would that be referring to Muhammad and not to any other prophet that will emerge later on? How do Muslims argue that this is referring particularly to some prophet in Islam?
Is it about lineage? Like who Muhammad's family and ancestors are?
Okay, good. So let's see what he's saying. So very good. So let's see what he's saying. He's going to emphasize the word Navi mikirbecha me'achecha, kamoni, from your brother, from your brethren, from among your brethren. That's the English translation here. So somebody in your family, but not a direct offspring of yours. So Moses is not saying some descendant of mine will become a prophet later on, but rather some descendant of somebody in the family. And from the Al-Maghrabi's perspective, from Samuel Al-Maghrabi's perspective, this must be referring to somebody outside of the Israelites, a different nation. Let's see how he reads that.
All right. Okay, so they cannot deny this verse from the second portion of the fifth book of the Torah.
So this is actually not found in the second portion. It's not found in Parashat Va'et Chanan. It appears later on in Parashat Shoftim. It's from the fifth portion of the fifth book of the Torah. When he starts by saying they cannot deny this verse, I actually hear a little bit lack of confidence. Maybe he's a little bit shaky or hesitant whether this proof will be accepted by Jews. But at least that's how he's trying to sound. They will never be able to reject or deny this verse from the Sefer Dvarim. Continues this. Meaning,
I will raise them up a prophet from among their brethren like unto thee, in him they shall believe. This is certainly an allusion to the fact that they will believe Muhammad.
So again, they cannot deny this is certainly an allusion for that they shall believe in Muhammad, because if it's talking about somebody, a prophet from among their brethren, it must be referring to somebody in the family, but not direct descendant of Moshe. And he continues and explains, should they say,
the text has from among their brethren, and it is unusual for our scripture to refer to non-Israelites as your brethren. You would say, it says in the Torah, your brethren, the children of Esau, namely in the first portion of the fifth book, so in Parashat.
Meaning,
you are to pass through the border of your brethren, the children of Esau that dwell in Seir, and do not covet any of their lands. Now, if the children of Esau were brethren to the children of Ishmael, because Esau and Israel were the sons of Isaac, then the children of Ishmael are likewise brethren to all the progeny of Abraham.
Okay, so what is he arguing? He's asking, perhaps one might argue and say, when the Torah employs the words achehem or mikerev me'achecha, maybe it's referring to some other fellow Jew, right? We see, if you find your friend's ox or donkey wandering around. Over there, it also refers to one's brother, and obviously it's usually referring to a fellow Jew. So perhaps one might argue that Moshe here also is referring to some Jewish or Israeli descendant of his. Says Samuel al-Maghabi, no, that is not a convincing argument. If one would say it says your brother and it is unusual for our script to refer to non-Israelites as your brother, we will say to him, it's not true. We do find the term or the formulation achim speaking about somebody outside of the, not just somebody from within the Israeli nation, but also somebody else. For instance, when Moshe approaches the people of Israel before they're about to go through the land of Edom, he says, "Atem ovrim mikvul achichem bnei Esav." So Esav is not one of the Israelites; it's just the brother of Jacob, and he's referred to as Echav. If this is true with regards to Esav and Yaakov, why not argue that when Moshe is referring to a future prophet from among your brethren, it also might be referring to some brother outside of the Israeli family itself. And what would be more natural than arguing that this is speaking about Muhammad, the descendant of Ishmael? You might argue and ask, but it doesn't say really in this verse that this is referring to a descendant of Ishmael. It could be a descendant of another brother, such as of Edom. And as a matter of fact, it's not so clear that this verse was speaking about Muhammad. There were other people in Christianity, for instance, some people argue that this is actually a verse referring to Jesus and not to Muhammad. So it's not clear what future prophet this is talking about, but at least from an Islamic perspective, this is a clear proof. They cannot deny this proof. That another place where we find references to Muhammad in the Torah itself. The last one we're going to do is a bit more sophisticated, and I think it even connects to something that will become related to Chag Shavuot, to Chag Matan Torah that we're about to read, past the text that we're about to read in 2 weeks from now. For this one, we will rely not just on Samuel al-Maghrabi's familiarity with the Bible, but also he clearly reveals his exposure to Jewish traditions, to Jewish midrashim, to Jewish interpretations that appear in rabbinic literature. So he was really a well-educated Jew, not just a young kid who went to first grade or second grade and read some stories in the Torah. He must have been aware of many, many other traditions in post-biblical period, and he's using all of his knowledge in a way that supports Islam. This is still from his book about the previous verse, and now we're moving to the next text. The next text is that he uses is from the beginning of Parashat Vezot HaBracha, the last parasha of the Torah, and I'm going to read the Hebrew. We'll read the English as well, and I'll address the problem that leads to his argument. The Torah starts by saying as follows: Moshe is now blessing the people of Israel right before he dies. I'm reading it in Hebrew first. Vezot HaBeracha asher berach Moshe ish Elohim et bnei Israel lifnei moto. So this is the blessing with which Moses, the man of God, blessed the people of Israel before his death. Vayomar, he said, Hashem misinai ba, vezarach miseir lamo, hofia mehar paran, ve'atam yirivvot kodesh, mimino esh dat lamo. So he said, the Lord came from Sinai and dawned from Seir upon us. He shone forth from Mount Paran, and he came from the 10,000s of holy ones with flaming fire at his right hand. And I'm continuing a little bit in the Hebrew without the English translation. אף חובב עמים כל קדושה בידיך והם תוכו לרגליך יישא מדברותיך, תורה ציווה לנו משה, מורשה קהילת יעקב. So I want to ask you, I think it's a pretty obvious question. What event is Moshe referring to when he's talking about in verse 2, when he says, the Lord came from Sinai and dawned from Seir upon us and shone forth from Mount Paran? What event is he referring to? So I think it's pretty clear. If you see the word Sinai, you immediately associate this with the giving of the Torah, Matan Torah. And if it wasn't clear just by the fact that Sinai appears here, so as I read in verse 4, it actually refers to the giving of the Torah. Torah tziva lanu Moshe, morasha kilat Yaakov. And only afterwards, Moshe will start with the actual blessings of each one of the 12 tribes. But the opening is addressing the story of the giving of the Torah. It's not really clear why does Moshe choose to open up his blessing statement with this, referring to the story of the giving of the Torah, but that's not going to be our main concern. My main concern is the words that I put in a different color in red, and this is a very interesting question. The Torah seems to be referring to Matan Torah at Mount Sinai. But if that's the case, why does the Torah refer to numerous locations or places where God appears? It doesn't just say that the Lord appeared from Mount Sinai, right? It doesn't just say the Lord came from Sinai, but it also mentions 2 other sites. It talks about God shining from Seir and also appearing or shown forth in English from Mount Paran. So what is this referring to? Why do we have numerous references or numerous revelations that appear in this text? How do we explain that? So this is not a new question. It's actually a very, very old question. And it seems that already in the 2nd century, maybe even before, Jews were addressing this question, coming up with all sorts of explanations. But the most common explanation was that, as a matter of fact, God did not only appear at Mount Sinai. And now I'm going to remind you of a legend that a lot of you probably are familiar with from early years of childhood, that when the Torah was given to Am Yisrael, to the people of Israel, it was not only, the Torah was not really offered just to them. It was actually offered to all sorts of nations, to all sorts of all different people, different umot, but they all refused to get the Torah. And it was only the Jews who were willing, only the Jews who said at the end, Na'aseh v'nishma, and that's why it ended up staying by us. So this is a very ancient Jewish tradition, and this Jewish tradition probably was relied in its original formation stages on this verse, because the verse is referring to numerous sites and not just to one site. How do we know this? So we know this already in ancient translations. One of the Aramaic translations called Pseudo-Jonathan, Targum Yonatan, alludes to this idea in his Aramaic translation of the Torah. But I want to bring you a more famous, detailed description of this from the Midrash. The text I'm going to do now, this is just an illustration of Matan Torah, just to make you more fascinated. This is a medieval manuscript of Matan Torah, but I'm sorry, I'm taking away this pleasure of seeing this picture. What we're going to do now is going to read a passage from the Mechilta. The Mechilta is the Midrash, 2nd century Midrash on Exodus, but in the Midrash, it also addresses the verse from Deuteronomy. Hashem misinai ba, וזרח משעיר lam, ומופיע מהר פרן, ועתה מרבבות קודש. So again, we're going to need you to read a little bit here. And it was
for the following reason that the nations of the world were asked to accept the Torah, in order that they should have no excuse for saying, had we been asked, we would have accepted it. For behold, they were asked, and they refused to accept it.
Okay, so here we already see at the beginning, what's the point of this? What's the message of this Midrash? Why was it so important? Beyond finding biblical basis for this idea, what was the point of coming up with this Midrash that the Torah was offered to all nations? It actually appears in different forms in different Midrashim. Some Midrashim, like this one, emphasize the fact that Jews shouldn't feel, or perhaps some apologetic agenda, Jews shouldn't feel bad. Why are they the only ones who have access to the Torah? They shouldn't feel puzzled by that. Why wasn't the Torah offered to other people? So it's assuring everybody, look, everybody got its chance. And the fact that Jews have the Torah does not mean that they were chosen by God in such a non-fair manner. Everybody has a chance, and other nations just rejected to accept the Torah. In other Midrashim, it actually appears in a different form. In some Midrashim, it's trying to emphasize that the Israelites have a stronger responsibility for practicing or fulfilling the mitzvot. Other nations are not going to be blamed because they said from day one, they're not willing to take this Torah. But the Jews who said, yes, we will go ahead, Na'aseh v'nishma, their responsibility is much greater. So this Midrash, the idea that the Torah was offered to all nations, but only the Jews accepted it, was used in different manners. But we're not concerned so much now with the message, with the idea behind this Midrash, but more, it's a biblical foundation. And the Midrash continues, for it is said, here. We don't hear you. You're muted.
Pardon me. And he said, the Lord came from Sinai. He appeared to the children of Esau, the wicked, and said to them, will you accept the Torah? They said to him, what is written in it? He said to them, thou shalt not murder. They said to him, the very heritage which our father left to us was, and by thy sword that shalt thou live.
Okay, so we start by the verse of with the Edomites, the descendants of Esau, and according to this Midrash, God appears to the children of Esau, asks them, will ye accept the Torah? and they reject. They say, we can't accept the Torah. In the Torah, it says, Lo tirtzach, you shall not murder. We can't keep this, we can't stop or avoid murder because this is our tendency. By thy sword you shall live. The Midrash links between Esau and Seir because in the Torah itself, Esau is described as a person who's Seir, very hairy, and he also dwells eventually in the land of Seir. So we can understand why Chazal decided to link between Esau and Seir. V'zarach mi Seir lamo, and they say Esau was actually offered to accept the Torah, but at that point he just decided that it's not for him. We continue.
Then he said to the children of Ishmael, he said to them, will you accept the Torah?